Welcome to A Tale of Two Shows, enabling remote theatrical performance during the coronavirus pandemic. This is going to be a deep dive into the development and use of a remote performance system, specifically the system used by the SUNY Oneonta Theater Department for its fall 2020 shows. My name is Matt Grenier. I'm the Assistant Technical Director for the Theater Department and also the developer of the remote performance system that we used. This presentation will focus a lot on the combination of Zoom and a software program called vMix. If you're creating your own remote performance system and you aren't using Zoom and vMix, you'll still get a lot out of this presentation. It covers a lot about remote performance systems in general, so you don't need to be using Zoom and vMix to get a lot of useful information here. If you are using vMix, though, this is not going to be an in-depth tutorial on vMix. There'll be lots of useful tips, tricks, and how-to related to its use for remote theater, but you'll definitely have to look elsewhere for comprehensive information about how to use vMix. The video version of this presentation is broken down into 4 parts. So in the first part here, we're going to present some background information. We're going to go through the goals that we had for our remote performance system, and then we're going to talk through the research that we did in order to develop our remote performance system. In part 2, we'll talk about the implementation of the system step by step, as well as the testing of the system and the changes that we had to make in order to get everything to work. In part 3, we'll talk about the use of the remote performance system throughout the rehearsal process, with an emphasis on design and programming and coordinating with actors at home. And then in part 4, we'll wrap everything up with a summary of the performances, some reflections on the entire process, as well as results of how things went, and then some credits at the end. Before we get started, please note that there are documents available for download related to this presentation that may be mentioned throughout the video, so those are all available at the link here. And there's also a PDF download available as well with all of these slides. If you do have the PDF, you'll notice that all of these links will work. They'll allow you to navigate around the presentation, so you can get yourself to any particular section you want to look at. You can get yourself back to the table of contents very easily. I'm going to take a look at the last slide here. On the last slide, there is also contact information, a link to download the files, and some places where you can get further information. There's also a menu across the top of every slide that shows you which section you're in and gives you a quick link to get back to that table of contents. Let's jump in with some background information. For those of you who are unfamiliar, I just wanted to give you a little bit of info about SUNY Oneonta and our theater department here. I'm not going to go through this information line by line. There's a lot of slides that I'm going to kind of skip past. Since you have the video, you can pause and read as needed. If you've downloaded the PDF, obviously you have the information that way as well. So if you're not familiar with us, here's a little info about our department so you can get an idea of how big we are and that sort of thing. So our college at the start of fall 2020 was planning to open for residents with some in-person instruction, very little in-person instruction, but there was going to be some. The theater department, we had originally planned to produce Medea and Noises Off during the fall 2020 semester. What we chose to do to adapt our plans was to continue with Medea. So we basically comply with all the state health policies, the college's reopening plan, and we still were going to do Medea as an in-person class with no audience. We would just record it and release it on video. We'd plan mask wear and distancing into the design of the production. Our costumes were actually based on the Star Wars universe, so we could very easily incorporate mask and facial coverings into the design of the costumes. And then the other show we were going to do, we actually scrapped. So we scrapped Noises Off and decided to do a live remote production of the children's story, My Father's Dragon. So actors would audition, rehearse, and perform from home using video conferencing technology. For those that aren't familiar with Medea, Medea is a Greek tragedy. It focuses on the plight of Medea, who follows her new husband Jason to his home country. She's betrayed by him and her new home, and she's treated as an intruder and a danger to society. If you are interested in watching our production before continuing with this presentation, it is available on our website, and you can access it also in the PDF by clicking this link right up at the top here. In terms of where we were at in our preparations for Medea, we did already have costumes being designed. So these are some of the renderings by our costume designer Bethany Marks that were in progress leading into the semester. We had a scenery design by John Bagby that was in progress that sort of integrated distancing into the design to keep actors separated from each other and spread apart and all of that sort of thing. So that's where we were at with Medea. My Father's Dragon is a children's story about a character named Elmer Elevator who travels to an island to rescue a dragon. So there's lots of fun encounters with animals and things like that along the way. If you want to check out our show before you continue with this presentation, you can go to the theater department website, or you can click on this link in the PDF right up at the top. With My Father's Dragon, the state of our preparations was focused around the work that our director had done in the script. So My Father's Dragon, the script was adapted by our director for a traveling children's show originally, and he took that work and adapted it further for a remote format, so to be performed over Zoom, essentially. And the main objectives of this was of doing the show this way were to include remote students that couldn't be back on campus with us, and then to also entertain and help educate kids at home. And then also to be live. The intent of this project was to perform it live so that the actors knew that the audience was, there was somebody on the other end of their performance receiving their performance, to try to keep it as much like traditional theater in that sense as possible. The director did prepare the script around sort of a 3x3 grid format. So essentially preparing the show to have to work within the sort of the rigid visual confines of a video conferencing application. And then the other thing about the script is that it does include several songs that the actors have to sing, and quite a lot of synchronous lines. So that was something that we had to think about leading into the project. So, as many of you may know, as was reported internationally, we had a coronavirus outbreak right at the start of the semester that caused the campus to be shut down, and students had to be sent home within the first couple weeks of the semester starting. I'm not going to comment on the particulars of the outbreak or the shutdown. It was a very stressful and demoralizing experience. And we don't have time to dwell on it anyway. But the question is, how did that change our plans for the shows? For My Father's Dragon, we were generally prepared for that change because we were already planning to be in the remote format. The show was certainly still affected, but we were generally prepared for that change. Medea had completed in-person auditions, and rehearsals were just about to begin in person. Rather than cancel, the director and the cast chose to move to the remote format as well. So we would still record it, we'd still edit and release it on video. We would just do it all remotely now. So now the big thing that had changed is that now we have to deal with 2 shows in a remote context instead of just one. So this is a list of some of the things that we were considering as we were starting to think about remote performance. This isn't comprehensive at all. There could be a lot more items on this list. You could go on for days thinking about these things, and we certainly did. So we'll just kind of talk about the ones that we were thinking about the most. The first one is suitability of the show to the remote format given the available resources that you have. So some shows are certainly maybe better suited to a remote context in terms of what they require. One of the reasons we did decide to move Medea to the remote format was because it could work in that format rather easily. Most of the time there's only a couple actors on the screen together, and it's fairly static. It's not too dynamic. So it lends itself well to being remote in that sense. A very big, complicated musical production is going to be way harder to do in the remote format than something that's much simpler and kind of stripped down. The next one is the number of actors in the show versus the number that will need to appear on screen together. Those two different things matter a lot. If you need to have if there are a lot of actors in your show, but you're only ever going to put say 3 or 4 of them on screen together, that makes some of the technical requirements possibly quite a bit easier than if you need to put say 20 or 25 people on screen together. Then we have actor participation requirements. What the things we have to think about. What does an actor need? What do we need them to have in order to participate in this format? And that starts right at auditions. And for us, that was a little bit of a problem because we had already auditioned one show in person without any expectation that those actors would be performing from home. So one show was the actors were sort of prepped knowing that's what they were getting into, and on the other show they really were not. They were not prepped in that sense. So auditions is where that really begins. And the things we're thinking about in terms of requirements are, do they have a suitable performance space where they can perform uninterrupted? What kind of technology and internet connection do they have access to? And then, in addition to that, the whole issue of coordinating with actors at home. So, communicating with actors at home is just so much more difficult than being when you can communicate with them right in person when you're seeing them regularly. As we know, it can be kind of hard to get. It can be hard to get cooperation and information from actors depending on where you are in the process. Getting people to sign up for fittings and things like that. That all just becomes so much more difficult when you're remote. And then another issue is resource provision. So getting things to actors at home, you need to be shipping things to them or delivering things. Technical support, actors need help with all the things that they're going to be expected to do in the remote format, and so part of this is providing training and support to them at home, providing information about what they need to do and filling in any knowledge gaps that there may be. And then on the costuming front, measurements and fittings are a whole another issue. How do you get measurements from actors when you can't go and visit them, or how do you test fit anything if you can't go and visit them? So that's a whole other problem as well. Then we have opportunities for non-actors. So we're talking about our stage managers, our technicians, our designers, all of those, all of the technical side of what we do. How do we provide opportunities for them to still be involved in the show, in addition to the director and the actors on the performance side of things? Then we have the development and deployment schedule of your remote performance system, which is that's pretty significant, because if you're trying to develop and deploy the system while you're also rehearsing and doing everything with the shows, that's it's going to be a lot to manage. So think about we have to think about what that schedule is going to be like in terms of what it might give us time to do or not to do. And then these ones kind of have these couple things have a little bit more to do maybe with live performance and their difficulty, but how to respond to technical difficulties is a big one, like especially for live performance. Are you doing a live show? Because if you are, then the speed with which you need to be able to respond to technical issues is just so much greater. You need to be able to react much more quickly. And then captioning and accessibility is another concern in this format, and particularly that is more challenging for live performance, especially if there's any component of sort of improvisational content that you can't serve the captions from pre-scripted content. And then some things that we are also thinking about is, the potential that any system is going to have for low latency or synchronous speech or even singing. That's a question that comes up, on the creative side of things from the directors and the actors, and what is possible to achieve, like what can we expect, and we have to sort of manage everyone's expectations, as we learn these things, what can we actually achieve and what we can't. And then also there's a potential for implementation of audience participation. Are you going to involve your audience in any direct or indirect way, especially if you're doing a live performance? One of the reasons that came up for us is because My Father's Dragon is a children's show, and we were trying to target our marketing toward schools, and there was a question of, could we find ways that we could maybe integrate students in the classroom with the show in any way. So that was one of the reasons we were thinking about that. So with all this in mind, let's go ahead and establish what our goals are, and these are the goals that we had for our system. So number one, bring our actors together. That's what the whole point of this is. Enable the actors to rehearse and perform together in real time, and real time in quotes meaning as close to real time as we can achieve, considering the delays involved. And then also utilize existing video conferencing technology. So we're not going to reinvent the wheel here. We're not doing any, inventing of technology here. We're going to utilize whatever technology solutions are pre-existing. Second goal here, broadcast to an audience. So we need to enable the performance to be captured for broadcast to an audience. And in this sense, I mean captured meaning recorded for later editing and publication, or perhaps directly streamed live over the internet for a viewing audience. Next goal, control what is on the screen. So controlling what the audience sees and hears is a fundamental to the magic of theatrical performance, in normal times. Normally that's, we achieve that by drawing curtains, moving scenery, dimming the lights, whatever we want to do on stage to affect what the audience sees. In this context, now we have to do all that by controlling what the audience sees and hears on their screens at home. So we need to be able to control that. Next goal is to keep the actor interaction with the system as simple as possible. So remote performance is very complicated for actors to begin with. Like, they're having to worry about so many things that they wouldn't normally have to worry about. An actor at home they're their own lighting person, their own sound person, they're doing their own scenery, they're a camera operator, they're doing their own makeup and costume, dressing, and handling their own props, and they're their own IT person. They're doing all of these things. So anything that we can do to simplify their interaction with the system would be valuable. One of those things is to use a simple video conferencing tool. So we want to do something that requires minimal special configuration on the actor's device, on the actor's end. No super special networking or anything that would require sort of a complicated setup on their part. We want to use something that's simple for them. And then if we can also, we wanted to prevent the actors from having to do any manipulation of their device settings while performing. So they don't have to turn their camera on and off, mute their microphones, change the backgrounds, any of that stuff. If we can do all of that with our remote performance system, that's several more things the actors don't have to worry about on top of everything else that they do have to worry about. Next goal is to be able to add other production elements to the show. So we want to be able to introduce graphics, video clips, music, sound effects, credits, whatever other production elements we want to be able to add. We want to be able to do that, easily with the system we're putting in place. And part of that is providing opportunities, for our designers to contribute creatively. So if we can add all those other elements to the show, like in this image here, you're seeing a background, two different backgrounds, a building, a sky. You're seeing some effects going on here, some graphical elements, right? If we can integrate that, it gives more opportunity for our designers to contribute to the show. And then we also want to be able to manipulate the background. A part of this is to be able to manipulate the background to establish and change the setting. So if we can do that, it's opportunity for our designers, and we can help establish locations and contribute to the storytelling in that way. Another goal that we had was to enable remote control of the remote performance system. So part of providing opportunities for non-actors includes allowing technicians to help operate the show when they aren't allowed to be in the broadcast studio physically. And we had that problem where we were not allowed to have even our students that were still living in town 5 minutes away from campus. We were not permitted to let them come into our broadcast studio and be involved in the operation of the show. So if we wanted to have them be involved, we had to have a means of them doing it remotely. And a big part of that, for performance is allowing the stage manager and the operator to call cues and control the system from home, so that they can trigger the progression of the show from home. Another goal is to adapt rapidly to technical issues. So obviously any show can be derailed by technical issues, but when you're trying to pursue a live project, which normally theater is live, so normally our pressures to adapt to technical issues in live theater are pretty immediate. If something happens, we have to have a plan or a way of responding to it immediately, and if we don't, we're going to be forced to respond to it immediately. But so that is what we do in theater. We prepare ahead of time so the show can go on. And some things that factor into this in terms of the system, first is, again, use a simple video conferencing tool so that the actors can easily switch between devices. So, Zoom, all these different programs, they're accessible on phones, tablets, computers. It would be better for an actor to switch to, a less than ideal device, like to their cell phone, and be able to continue contributing to a live performance. That would probably be better than just having them be missing altogether because the one device that they had is suddenly not working or you're having a problem with. So that's another motivation for using a simple video conferencing tool. Then also we want to, if we can, prevent actor dropout from completely changing the screen layout. So in a lot of video conferencing programs, when somebody leaves the meeting, the screen arrangement will automatically change because you just lost a participant in the meeting. And if we can, we want to avoid that from happening, so that we can, again, keep control over the screen. If we can, we want to enable quick muting of actor video and audio. So if something does happen, particularly in a live show context, we can very quickly mute that actor's video or audio so we're not maybe seeing or hearing something really undesirable on screen. Some other ways we could approach this, we could have ways to enable alternates, whether that's an understudy or somebody taking over and reading from the script. to quickly sub into the show if necessary. And then also, in the live show context, perhaps you maybe even want to have, recordings from your final rehearsals or your final dress rehearsal ready to go in case there is some kind of major technical issue. You could default to a recording so that your audience could continue to experience the show. Our last goal here is, of course, to be attainable and affordable. And for us, that meant utilizing as many existing department and college resources as we could. Working with the other offices and departments on our campus to gather expertise where we could. So we worked very closely with IT and networking and telecom and creative media services. Where we did have to purchase equipment, we really had to balance the cost and quality to remain within a limited budget. Prior to our shutdown at the start of the semester, we had submitted a really stripped down budget of about $8,500 for our 2 shows, and about $5,600 of that was for equipment and licenses, and $2,900 was for shop assistants. Once the shutdown happened, the spending controls were even further tightened, so we really had to stay as far below that stripped down budget as we could. So these were the goals that we had for our remote performance system. They're you may have pretty much the same goals, or there might be other ones you could think of that would be high priority that I didn't include here, but these were the goals that we were working with. So with these goals in mind, it's time now to do some research on how we can possibly create a system that would meet all of these goals. We're going to start off with some terminology here, and I am not going to go through all of this terminology. I really dropped it in here because I had gone through the effort of sort of defining terms as I started my research, and since I had it all written down, I figured I might as well share it with all of you. So I'm not going to go through every term here in detail, but it is here for you if you'd like it. One point I will mention on this first slide here is just to make sure we're clear about what we're talking about when we mean virtual performance versus remote performance. Virtual is not necessarily remote, because virtual could mean you are performing on your stage and you're all together, but you're recording it or you're live streaming or whatever. So it's becoming virtual in that sense. A remote production is always virtual because you're physically not all in the same place as one another. So remote is always virtual. Virtual is not necessarily remote, though I do kind of hear people switching, using these two sort of interchangeably. So just to make sure we're clear what we're talking about. There's some other terms here: live stream performance, live stream service, restreaming service, video calling and conferencing. I think most of us are pretty familiar with that. However many months we are into the pandemic now, I think we all know what that is. Video call, conference, what is meant by a participant, what is meant by the host, what is meant by the presenter or the guest. What do we mean by a meeting? What's a waiting room? What about a breakout room? And then what is a webinar? If you aren't familiar with the differences between a webinar and a meeting, definitely look this over a little closer. We'll come back to webinars in a minute, but definitely look over it if you're not familiar with what a webinar is. So this one is actually really important when you're researching these things and trying to find a solution, is the difference between seats and cameras on screen. So the seats available in a video call or a webinar or whatever kind of platform service provider is saying you can have this many people in a meeting, they may be talking about seats, just number of people that are are virtually allowed to be present, but that is different from how many are allowed to be on screen at the same time. So you may come across the phrase cameras on screen, which is the number of people that can be on screen together, and a lot of times that number is is quite a bit less than the number of seats available, because you only have so much space on screen and so much video bandwidth. So, you might be allowed 100 participants in your call, but the platform can really only support putting 25 cameras on screen at one time. So just keep that in mind if you are researching providers and stuff. Try to make sure you really get down to the nitty gritty on how many cameras on screen versus how many seats are they providing you. So the next one is broadcast video software, which is going to be very relevant to our remote performance system. So people are finding the limitations of video conferencing to be a problem for theater performance. So we're all kind of turning to live broadcast video editing software. So if you're not familiar with what we mean by that, there's some more information here. We're basically talking about a video editing program that is meant for live video. So something that would be used in a television context, to take incoming video and process it, do different things to it, remove a green screen background, that sort of thing, composite it all together, and then send it out live to wherever you need to go. So and most of this software is standalone. It has to be installed on your computer. It's not really, they don't tend to be like cloud-based solutions. They're just too intensive in what they have to do for the most part. So the next question, or a good question to ask is starting any research, is there a turnkey option? Is there an out-of-the-box solution that we could use or that we could hire that would enable us to do everything we want to do without us having to invent it all ourselves? So we want to consider what is already out there. It's a little crazy because the options here have been changing dramatically in even the last 3 to 6 months. Like, a lot of online marketing and ticketing platforms are pivoting to offer live streaming support. There's new businesses and freelancers trying to provide for this niche of trying to do theater remotely online. So I'm just going to highlight a few options, the ones that really stood out to me as possibly being valuable if you wanted to go with sort of a more of a turnkey option. The first one is called StreamYard, which is all-in-one, very simple web-based video conferencing, editing and streaming. So it does have like way more screen controls than you typically would get from typical video conferencing, because it's really meant for running a live stream. It's not at all specific to the theater industry. There is a subscription fee, and it is quite simple. So you'd really want to be doing a pretty simplistic project in terms of any extra effects or processing or things that you might want to do. If you were going to rely on StreamYard by itself, you'd want to probably be doing something pretty simple from what I saw looking at them. Another one is called On the Stage. There's a link here if you want some more info. They don't have a lot of information on their website. You have to schedule a demo with them to essentially have a virtual meeting with a representative and talk through what they offer, which I did. I did do that during our research phase. Basically, what they're providing is guidance through the virtual performance process, whether it's remote or not. If it's remote, their platform revolves around Zoom. They're not, at least at the time that I spoke with them, offering any kind of advanced creative support, music, sound effects, transitions, cueing, anything like that. That's not part of the offering. It's very focused around the marketing, the ticketing, publishing support, sort of providing you checklists in each phase of the process. So it's definitely a valuable resource if you're looking to do a virtual or remote show. But if you're really looking to get into controlling things on the screen in maybe a more complicated way, this isn't necessarily going to do it. Payment is also tied to ticket sales, which actually didn't work for us because our shows were going to be free. So we were not planning on selling tickets at all. So having a payment structure based around ticket sales wasn't going to work for us. A couple others here which are much more kind of hands-on involved support. One is the streaming theater. They provide end-to-end support for remote productions, so including some integration of creative elements like sound effects, graphics, transitions, and whatnot. Last I was aware, they were relying on Zoom and a broadcast software application. Actually, I became aware of this group because one of our a recent alumnus of our program was involved in a production with them. So that's how we kind of became aware and reached out and asked some questions. I'm not sure what broadcast software they use. Payment varies hourly, packages, ticket splitting, stuff like that. So they could be an option for really in-depth support and still being able to add kind of some creative elements to your show. Liminal Entertainment is another one that has come up a lot. They're a provider of virtual events, end-to-end hands-on support available for consultations on workflows, hardware, software solutions. Actually, some of the stuff I've seen on their website has only developed in the last few months, so they've changed quite a lot in even the last few months. Some of the software they've developed as well. So they are developers of Zoom OSC and a program called Streamweaver Lite, which are quite interesting. Zoom OSC use media servers to control Zoom UI functions via OSC, and Streamweaver is about transmitting ArtNet and SACN and OSC over the internet. So you could send an RGB light fixture to an actor's home, have them connect it to their computer, and then control the lighting fixture remotely, which is pretty cool. So those are the turnkey options that I found. The next part of the research here is about the use of video conferencing versus a webinar platform. So if you're not familiar with webinar, a webinar is built around this structure where you have a bunch of participants that come to the webinar platform to watch some sort of presentation that is delivered by the host and by the presenters. So this is already that's kind of pretty nicely set up for a performance, because your host could be, your director or your stage manager, your actors can be the presenters, your audience can be the participants, and perhaps you could just use an out-of-the-box webinar solution, in that way. A lot of webinar services have built-in tools that can help with audience engagement, marketing, ticket sales, all kinds of things like that. Some of the drawbacks that I found looking at webinar platforms was that the number of cameras on screen is much fewer than you can have with video conferencing, unless you're doing a show with only maybe a few actors. The limitations are just too significant as far as how many people you can put on screen together. And then often there's limited control of the presenter layout on screen. And I found that webinar solutions are always more expensive than video conferencing. Sometimes they're prohibitively expensive. If you want to have the option of broadcasting to, say, 1,000 people or 5,000 people, you could be spending quite a bit on that webinar service in order to allow you to have that many participants. Though one way you can get past that is you can live stream at the same time as you're hosting your webinar. So perhaps not all of your audience are participants. Maybe only some that might possibly interact at some point during the show are your participants, and then you're just live streaming out your webinar otherwise. So that's a way to kind of get around that participant limit. If you're just going to live stream it, you can live stream and then not necessarily have very many of these sort of official participants, because participants can typically be temporarily elevated to the status of a presenter. So if you want to bring an audience member temporarily into your show in some way by hearing them or seeing them or something like that, then you need them to be a participant and not just outside of this watching on a live stream, if that makes sense. All right, so what if we're going to do this with just video conferencing alone then, if we don't want to work within the restrictions of a webinar platform, or maybe we don't want to spend that extra money to use a webinar service. So we could just do video conferencing alone, which is fairly straightforward because most of these applications already have recording tools built in, so you can record the meeting and then edit it later. Some of them, like Zoom, you can also just directly stream your meeting to out to a live stream. So you can do it with just video conferencing alone. What are the advantages to doing this? Obviously, it's relatively simple to implement. You can just do it all on a single computer even. Typically, the actors can pretty easily text chat with one another because they're all in the platform and together, and text chat is usually a feature. So you can have text chat going on. And then you can use, things like screen sharing or virtual audio patch cords to, add video or audio production elements from other applications. So there are ways you can get titles and credits and transition video and music and sound effects and things, integrated into a simple video conferencing call as well. Some disadvantages. You have very minimal or limited control of what appears on the screen. You're kind of at the mercy of whatever the platform features are. Many of these applications can't live stream directly. They don't necessarily have built-in support to live stream directly. Actors need to do a lot themselves. So, camera and microphone muting, for example. It's interesting. I believe Zoom has instituted a means with which participants in a meeting can give the host permission to unmute their microphone for them, but I don't think the same extends to the camera. So, cybersecurity issues come into play real fast when you start talking about camera and microphone muting. Like, you can't really expect, there to be functionality for the host or someone beyond the participant to turn their camera on, because that would be a serious cybersecurity problem if that functionality was easily exploitable, for example, or if it existed as a common feature, it might be more easily exploited. So actors tend to need to do all of that themselves, and including changing a virtual background out if you're using virtual backgrounds. Another thing is each actor has a different perspective of the show. So, each actor's experience of the show is just whatever the video conferencing application shows them, whether they're looking in gallery view or pinning a specific other person or participant in the meeting. But they each kind of have a different perspective of the show in that sense. Also, the screen layout likely changes if an actor leaves the call due to an internet interruption. So if someone drops out of the meeting, the video conferencing application is probably going to rearrange the screen in some way, which isn't necessarily good. And then, this format can also lean heavily on post-production. So, maybe if you're trying to do some fancier things, it's just going to end up being easier to do it, editing the show after the fact. So there might be more post-production involved to get where you want to go in this sense. So what can we do from here? So the next thing we can do is add broadcast software to our video conferencing application. And the main thing broadcast software allows is for any video conference call to be captured, edited, and then sent to a live stream or a recording. So our little chart here, we're seeing our video conferencing call. We're capturing the video and audio, bringing it into a broadcast software like OBS, vMix, Wirecast. There's various different ones. And then we're sending it out to a live stream, or we're recording it to our computer. And the software is capturing the call using screen capturing. So you've got maybe 2 monitors on your computer. The broadcast software is on one monitor, and then you're capturing the display of the second monitor in order to capture the video from the conferencing call. One nice thing about this is it does allow actors to see the same edited video as the audience, because you can route your video or sound back into your video conferencing call, so the actors can actually all kind of get the same perspective. They can see what the audience is seeing, or they can see anything useful that you might want to send them. So that can provide greater context for their performance. So advantages of this setup: one, any video conferencing platform can be used. So you can, as long as you can put it on screen, you can capture it and bring it into your broadcast software. It can be implemented on a single powerful computer with multiple displays. And you also don't need to return production video and audio like this. You don't need to send video and audio back, because all the actors are in a video conferencing call or meeting together. They're not relying on getting video back in order to be able to talk to one another. So they can perform together without that being provided to them. Some disadvantages: broadcast software can be expensive depending on what you choose to use. This one, returning video, introduces delays. So if you're taking an actor's video from the call, bringing it to your broadcast software, and then sending it back to them, they're then going to see themselves on screen at a delay. It's sort of like it's revealing the delays of the video conference call to themselves, because they're seeing themselves back. So that is something that has to be contended with. And then another disadvantage is, because we're relying on the software to capture the display, to screen capture the video conferencing call, if an actor leaves the call due to internet interruptions, there may be a significant adverse effect on the layout of the screen. So just to show you what I mean, here's an example. So on the left side here, we have 9 callers on screen in a video call, and we're doing 3 different screen captures. That's one thing I didn't mention. You don't have to capture the whole screen as one necessarily. A lot of programs will let you capture different regions of the screen even. So if we wanted to do one screen capture here on this person, that's A, and then another and another, we could bring those 3 different screen captures into the broadcast software as input video, essentially. So we'd have like 3 different channels of video coming in. The problem happens is, what if we lose a caller at some point? The broadcast software is going to continue capturing the screen exactly the way it was, but the video application may have rearranged the people on screen, as shown here. So we lost a caller, and the video application decided to go down to 2 people centered in this bottom row, and now on video feed A, we're seeing half of a person, B, we're seeing half of 2 people, and C, we're seeing half of somebody else. So that's the potential issue that you have in doing screen capture. So how could we get around this? Like, ideally, we want the broadcast software and the video conferencing application to be able to sort of communicate and send independent video that is not reliant upon capturing the display. So if we could send our individual callers from the video call to the broadcast software, that would solve our problems. So it turns out that some video conferencing platforms actually provide output of the individual callers in the meeting as NDI network video feeds. So that allows each individual caller's video inside of the meeting to be sent as a dedicated input to the broadcast software. So before we go any further here, we'll just mention what NDI is. So NDI is a royalty-free software standard. It essentially just means video and audio transmitted over a computer network. And this tends to happen, like internally in a studio over a local area network. So you have a high-speed local area network. You have a bunch of different devices, video, audio devices that are all connected to that network. So you might have like a big network switch in the middle here, and you can transmit video and audio between all those devices using this protocol called NDI. There is also a high efficiency, low bandwidth variant of NDI called NDI-HX if you want to look it up. You can't really use it for what we're talking about here. It's more applicable to cameras. Because you can use this same kind of setup with external cameras as well. So some cameras are capable of producing NDI-HX video. So give that a research if you're potentially using cameras that might support that. Okay, so advantages of capturing the individual callers. So first of all, this allows precise manipulation and combination of each actor's video. We're getting those dedicated video feeds of each participant in the meeting, so we can now precisely manipulate that video together. And because we're doing it this way, the screen layout in the conferencing call is irrelevant to the broadcast software. It does not care what kind of screen configuration there is in the video application, because it's receiving independent video feeds. So we don't have to worry about the screen arrangement changing or anything. This can also be implemented on a single powerful computer with multiple displays. You have one video conference call running here, and you have your broadcast software, so you can still run this all on one computer. Disadvantages. So you're limited to the number of feeds that the application will provide. So right now, the only ones that I'm aware of that provide NDI output is Skype and Teams, and they'll only send you so many NDI feeds at once. So if you want to have, say, 12 actors on screen together, that may exceed what Microsoft Teams will allow you to send at once. I believe I heard that Teams may only allow 8 callers to be exported as NDI at a time. So there is a limit to how many video feeds it will provide you. Also, NDI is bandwidth intensive. By definition, it takes a lot of data to send video and audio over your network. So the more callers you have, the more network traffic you're going to have to accommodate on your network. Another one is it may be detrimental for actors to refer to the production video and audio. So if you're going to send content back to them, since they're all in the same meeting together with one another, there could be detrimental effects to sending this back to them in terms of it not just revealing, say, video delays to them, but say sending their own audio back to themselves. That there could be issues in doing that, considering the video conferencing application is transmitting their their audio and video all around to one another anyway. And then the last thing is that independent audio is not sent with each one of these video signals. So the way most of these conferencing applications work is they sort of create a master mix of everyone's audio together, and that's what gets sent around to everybody. So you don't get independent audio with each caller. So the audio I'm receiving with caller 1's video is just everyone's audio. Same thing for caller 2, same thing for caller 3. So now there's no ability for us to mute individual actors or tweak their incoming audio in the broadcast software because all the audio is the same. So that's one of the big drawbacks to this kind of approach. All right, what's next? Well, the way we could get more control is if we used separate calls, right? Like, what if we used separate video conferencing calls or meetings for each of our inputs to the broadcast software? So essentially what we're doing is we're conducting a separate call with each participant in order to isolate their video and their audio and then transmit it via NDI to the broadcast software. So we do that separately for each person. What are the advantages to doing this? Well, it provides full control over the video and the audio from each actor, because now we are getting only the audio from the one participant in this video conference call. So the like in this example, Zoom is mixing together all the audio, but there's only one caller here, and then it's sending it to the broadcast software, so we're getting just that person's audio. So we get independent video and audio, which is really good for control. This is adaptable to shows of different sizes, so you could add as multiple additional calls as you want for different callers. And then a distributed system of computers helps silo special tasks like remote operation, observation by staff and designers, or interaction with a remote audience. So the thing here, the caveat with this is you can't really run separate video conferencing calls all on the same computer. Like it's not really feasible to have, say, 10 different Zoom meetings, all trying to run on the same computer. So now you have to get a separate computer involved for each one of these calls. So it becomes more of a distributed computer system in this case. What are the disadvantages of this? First of all, the number of independent video calls that you can have is limited by the network infrastructure and the bandwidth. Remember, we said NDI is very bandwidth intensive. So the more individual computers and callers you try to add, the more data you're trying to send over your local area network at the same time. And you're going to reach a saturation point. I believe each NDI feed can use up to about 100 megabytes a second of network data. So you could see how with 10 feeds, you could possibly be reaching 1 gigabyte per second, just with 10 different callers. So we'll come back to that later in a subsequent part of this presentation. Another disadvantage is this, this is a complicated setup. It does require multiple computers. It requires a network switch, and it probably requires IT support, depending on your situation and what you have available to you. In our case, we're at a college, so in order to do something like this, we definitely would need IT support to make this happen. Okay, next part of the research here, we're going to talk about our video conferencing options. So, because what we were just talking about can basically be done with any video conferencing solution. So you could use any of the ones seen here. You're probably familiar with a lot of these. There may be some that you're less familiar with or you haven't come across. These are all the ones that I came across in my research. I'm not going to go into these in any kind of depth. I had aspirations of testing out more of these with our broadcast system, but for us it mostly came down to Zoom and Microsoft Teams. I will say, I did collect research about them, and if you want to look at that research more closely, there is a PDF you can download at this link right here. One I did want to kind of mention just because it was a little bit interesting to me. This one called 8x8 apparently in the back end uses something called I think Jitsi, and take a look at the PDF about that one. It sounded interesting in the way that it processes video and audio in terms of latency. That it sounded interesting the way it processes video and audio. So take a look at that if you're interested. It doesn't. It sort of sends all the raw video and audio to every participant in a call instead of trying to mix it all together first, which could maybe there's advantages to that depending on what you're trying to do. So those are the video conferencing options. Next, we have the broadcast software options. If you're going to use a broadcast software, what should you use? These are the ones that that I found that were relatively low cost, software video switcher options. You could spend thousands and thousands of dollars probably for high-end software, the kind of stuff they use in news TV rooms and even accompanying physical hardware, controllers and stuff that goes with it. These are like the bottom of the barrel ones trying to do this on a budget. And if your budget is no money, then you're probably going to be looking at OBS, which is the first one in the list here, which is free and open source. There's lots of different like plugins and things. There is a link here to a YouTube video if you want to learn a little more about OBS. Open source solutions can be a little more hands-on and trying to get them configured for what you're trying to do, but I know a lot of people are using OBS with success, so that is a good one if you're looking for something free. The other ones I found were XSplit Broadcaster, which does have a renewing license required. You have to pay for on a subscription basis. vMix. Here's a general tutorial. vMix is a one-time purchase, which is good. And then Wirecast is another one-time purchase. And one thing to keep in mind too is, some of these are only Windows or Mac compatible. For me, vMix stood out from this, from these options. Largely for its feature set and the interface at the price point we're talking about. Also, vMix is Windows only, and we're working all on Windows, here in the studio. So being on Windows was not a problem at all. If you want to try to see what else is out there, do searches specifically for alternatives to, and then type one of these, and you'll get a lot of results for different sites that are comparing all sorts of different options. These are the ones that stood out to me in my research. Live streaming options. So we got about 5 main ones here that I was looking at. These are the biggest providers you probably heard of. For us, it really came down to YouTube and Facebook. Considering, it really came down to Facebook and YouTube for us. Microsoft Stream requires a Microsoft 365 subscription. There's some links here if you want to learn more about that. Vimeo is nice, but it is a premium. You need to have a premium plan to live stream. YouTube is free, but your channel has to be verified. There may be some things pertaining to child safety. You may want to look at their policy, depending on if you're doing like a children's show or not. Twitch is free. Facebook is free. There's some useful links here. If you are planning on integrating live captioning into a live show, you definitely want to look at these at your live streaming provider's options and features related to captioning. Which brings us to live captioning. This is in general a complicated subject. I have an entire separate document on research related to live captioning because we were planning to do a live show. My Father's Dragon was a live production to be accessibility compliant. We had to look at how do we provide live captioning for our live show. And a lot of things go into this when you really start digging into it. Are you doing closed or open captioning? Open captioning is always displayed on the screen. Closed captioning, the user has the ability to turn it on or off. Are you doing scripted or spontaneous content? Is your solution AI driven with speech recognition, or is it human driven with somebody who's actually utilizing stenography to to live type and caption that way? Are you generating your captions locally in your studio and encoding them there, or are you using a remote service provider to do that? And also, where is the integration point of the captioning with your live video? Is it in the video conferencing application? Is it in the broadcast software? Is it happening at the streaming service? So all these different things go into live captioning. So if you are looking to explore that, check out the PDF with the additional research about live captioning. All right, we're nearing the end of our research here. So the last thing here is kind of how do we navigate all the limitations that we're dealing with? We're thinking about so many different things. There's so many factors to think about, and to me it reminded me of the good, fast, cheap Venn diagram, except it feels like there's maybe like 10 other circles in the Venn diagram of like different things you have to think about. And if you find a solution that does this for you, well, it's not going to allow you to do that, and it's just an absurd game of trade-offs and things. So these are some of the things that I just tried to compile together about kind of the factors that went into the decision that the decisions that we made about what to pursue, and what to pursue in detail. So features, obviously, the features of any particular platform or service, what it costs, what kind of caveats are involved. Maybe they're only going to let you put 4 people on screen, but everything else is great. What's the operating system and hardware requirements, for what you want to do. How many people, how many participants versus how many you can show on screen? What kind of limits might there be on call length? Are you using a free or a paid version of your video conferencing service? Are there watermarks that might be a problem, depending on if you're using like a free or paid version of something? What kind of in-house resources and expertise do you have in your situation? What kind of customer service or technical support availability do you need? That's going to inform how you decide to approach things, and what kinds of customization are going to be required with the the method that you pursue. Is it going to require you to really do a lot of modifying of things in order to get it to work the way that you want it to? So those are all the kind of limitations that we were weighing in deciding what we were going to do, and this sort of evolved into our implementation phase by creating sort of an exploratory diagram of how a multiple computer system could be set up to meet all of the goals that we talked about at the beginning. So this is the diagram that I first created, with the idea in mind that we can probably get IT support from our college to put together a distributed system of computers. What would it actually look like in terms of how things would be routed, how it would be set up? So that's what this diagram is about. And it also does include specifically a section sort of about audience interaction, because again, with our live show, we were kind of weighing at the time whether we would have some sort of interactive component to our show. So it does have that on here. You can look at this diagram in detail by downloading it with the link right here. So that concludes the research phase and this part of the video presentation. So if you'd like to continue on to the next part, that will be the implementation and testing phase of the project.